Fats. So today we're going to talk about our second macronutrient. Last time out we talked about protein and how that is pretty much our most important macronutrient when it comes to fat loss, muscle building, everything really. Most of us don't get enough if we're not aware of the benefits of protein, and we really need to try and push it up. So today we're looking at fats. And remember, when we say macronutrients, we just mean big nutrients, so nutrients that we need in large amounts compared to vitamins and minerals, which we need in tiny amounts, which are called micronutrients. So fats, looking at things like our olive oils, any kind of sunflower oil, whatever oil it is, avocados, butter, nuts, dairy. There's also fats in meat and things like that, and obviously fats that we have in kind of more processed food. But that's not what we really want to concentrate on. So what are my actual functions of fat? So it's a large energy store, 9 calories per gram, and this is one of the biggest reasons why people will often tell you to have a low-fat diet when you're trying to lose weight, simply because for every 1 gram of fat, you could have actually 2 grams of protein or 2 grams of carbohydrate, which is obviously 4 grams of fat. It provides insulation, so obviously we didn't used to live in houses all the time, we needed to stay warm, and brown fat was particularly important at producing heat. It's protection, so obviously not just padding, but also an immune function role. It provides the building blocks for our sex hormones, so for males and females to some respect, testosterone, estrogen, oestrogen, and this has a huge impact on our mood. So males with low testosterone have been shown to have higher rates of depression, libido, so your sex drive, your body composition. These have huge overarching implications in terms of your functioning. And it helps us to absorb certain minerals. There are fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, K that we literally cannot absorb without fat, and we actually store them within our fats. So it's important that we actually get a good spread of them. And people often forget that this is important when it comes to diet. They're tasty. There's a thing about the palatability of fatty foods that's just tasty. I mean, if I never ate bacon again, it'd probably be a crying shame. So fats, they taste good. And they can also help provide you with some good level of satiety. Not as much as protein, but probably a little bit more than carbohydrate, potentially. So how much should we shoot for? Well, again, because it plays such an important role, fats are what we call essential. So you have to eat fats within your body, otherwise it cannot function. And there's the essential amount that we need is actually a tiny amount. But again, that's just enough to survive, not enough to thrive. So we recommend somewhere between 0.5 to 1.2 grams per kilogram, kind of based on your preference really. And if you're in that range, you're going to be healthy and you're going to be strong. Now, there may be times when you're looking to diet really hard that actually we may take you below that 0.5, but not for too long a period, because that's when we may have some problems. So just a quick example, for a 70 kilogram female, that's between 35 and 84 grams of fat per day. So that's quite a big spread. Remember, level 1 of our nutritional pyramid is adherence. So oftentimes, if you like fattier foods, we'll try and give you higher fats. If you like more carbohydrates, we'll give you low fats, because at the end of the day, we've got to get your calorie balance right. But if we're looking at using our PN portion control guide, that 1 thumb of fat. So as we said, fats, some are essential, so you've got to have in the diet, and others aren't. So others actually we can kind of synthesize through other parts of our diet, but there are some that are essential. And we have 3 broad main categories of fats. So we have saturated, which is kind of like your red meat, your cheeses, dairy, coconut oil, that's kind of been the saturated fat poster child, as it were, recently. And so saturated fat got a really bad rep probably in the 70s and 80s, and it was the devil basically when it came to kind of health, and that's kind of been disproven over recent years, almost, and it's gone too far in this extent where people are like thinking that coconut oil is this magic oil where we're going to put it in our coffee or we're going to cook with it and it's going to help us lose weight. Again, we'll talk about this later on in this section, but just because you eat more fat doesn't mean you're going to lose body fat, not necessarily at all. But know that they're not the devil. Then we have our monounsaturated fats, and these are often what we find in our Mediterranean diet, the well-celebrated Mediterranean diet. And these are unsaturated, and these are things like our avocados, our olive oil, our almonds. So normally saturated fat is solid at room temperature, and monounsaturated fat will be kind of more liquid. And then we have our polyunsaturated, which is our vegetable oils, salmons, which has got a really important omega-3s in. And if you don't eat that much fish, oily fish on a weekly basis, you may want to consider taking a fish oil supplementation. I haven't included a supplementation section within this 100-day course, but do speak to your coach. Nuts and seeds. And realistically, what should we be aiming for? A good mix of all three. So if we can get a third from saturated fat, a third from mono, and a third from poly, we're going to be doing pretty well. And normally we'll get that by eating a nutrient-dense, varied diet. So remember, when we think back to our food quality and our micronutrients, we're looking for roughly 70% of our food to come from naturally and unprocessed foods. And if we do that with good variety, we're going to probably be hitting these thirds of each one. So I did want to just cover this because it's pretty popular right now, and it's the idea that you can eat fat to burn more fat. And obviously this implies that if I eat, because I'm not eating fat, my body just holds on to all the fat that it's got. And if I eat more fat, my body knows that it's getting fats in, so it will allow me to release fats from my fat stores. However, when you eat more fat, you just burn more dietary fat. So what I mean by that is, if I eat more butter, my body will just naturally process and use more butter. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to use the fat that's within my body. They're two separate things. However, when people just say eat more fat to burn more fat, it makes it seem like because you're eating more butter, you're going to burn more body fat. It's just not the case. And if you burn more body fat will depend if you're on a calorie deficit or if you're in a surplus. So if you eat more butter and that puts you into a surplus, as in you're consuming more calories than you're burning, you're going to gain fat. However, if you decide to cut out all your carbohydrates but slightly increase your fats, that will mean that you're eating more fat, but you're eating more fat in a calorie deficit and you'll lose weight. So there is no real magic to this idea of eating more fat to burn more fat. So what are our fat take-homes? It plays a number of vital roles in the body. It's absolutely essential if we want to thrive. It is energy dense though, so we should be aware of our intake. And again, if you want to use a very rough guide, your portion control guide, or you can use that kind of, like we said, somewhere between 0.5 to 1.2 grams per kilogram of your body weight. Very low intake should be avoided. They may be necessary for short periods of time, but they will not be helpful in the long run. Aim for a balanced, quote unquote, or varied fat intake. So, as long as you're getting a varied diet of fairly unprocessed foods, you're going to do pretty well there. Eating more fat doesn't mean that you use more body fat. Again, it all comes down to energy balance. And dietary fat, if you're, within your 40s, your 50s, 60s, like my parents, they used to think that dietary fat was the absolute devil because that was what they were brought up on. Some now very misunderstood work that came from a gentleman called Ancel Keys, and basically dietary fat was demonized, and we now know that's simply not the case. So that's fats, and I'll see you next time for carbohydrate.